Hello everybody, and my name is Adam Nicholas. I am here for What Culture Wrestling to bring you, of course, as always, your usual dose of wrestling attires from the latest pay-per-view that has happened in the world of wrestling. This time, the pay-per-view we will be taking a look at is, of course, AEW's All Out. I am very tired. It is very late on because we have been producing content like nobody's business, because it's one of the biggest pay-per-views of the year, arguably, that has been out for the brand new company, of course, All Elite Wrestling. It's marching on as always, and for big pay-per-views, what do we normally get? We normally get big attires. People seem to go, if you'll pardon the pun, all out with everything that they are wearing in terms of making sure that they leave you with a lasting impact from the clobber that they had on themselves. And of course, we've seen some fantastic editions of this in the past, and this pay-per-view was no exception at all. If you're going to be a big star in a big company, then you have to leave your mark, and the best way to do that in the modern era is through some lovely, lovely threads. So without further ado, let's get right on with it. And these are all the hidden meanings for attires that we could find from All Elite Wrestling's All Out. And I say that because all the ones we could find means I'm sure you probably found some more along the way. But let's get into it, shall we? Number 8, Wardlow, the Terminator. So this was kind of weird. It was kind of cheesy, but you know what it is? It was kind of awesome as well in a weird kind of way. We got this bizarre vignette on the buy-in for the show, which basically, it was all started in the dark, it was shadowy, and then there was this figure walking around in a car park backstage. And sure enough, him and his partner, or girlfriend, or lady of the night, how do we know? We've just met the guy. It was 3 seconds into the promo, are flirting around in a car park before randomly being started on by a gang of youths, or mysteriously mischievous chaps. I don't know what they were, but they were there and they were causing bother in a car park. Well, they picked the wrong guy apparently, because this guy is Wardlow and this guy is not messing around. Now, he might not have been asking for their clothes, their boots, or their motorcycle, but he was absolutely the embodiment of what we have all come to know over the years as, of course, the Terminator, because this guy was started on in the car park, and it looks like they picked the wrong day to mess with Wardlow, because despite the fact that they felt the need to try and beat him up, one guy punched him and it was an absolute no-sell from the big man, who was just like, nah pal, not happening. And he followed that up with a big boot to some heads. He decked another guy, and then as one guy decided to randomly, the very last one, jump at him neck first, should I say, because obviously that's how you win all the fights in real life. Jump neck first at someone. That's going to work. He grabbed him by the throat and absolutely slammed the living daylights out of him. The sort of echoes of the Terminator from the 80s were absolutely undeniable here. He even had the scar across the back, the also notable look, the sort of big build, and for obvious reasons, after having taken off his shirt to do the fight, was all just stood there in all his ripped, hoss-like glory, and the comparisons between himself and Arnold Schwarzenegger were there for everyone to see. So if you put all of that together with his obvious invincibility, his mass destruction, and his capabilities to inflict it on his enemies, not to mention the pounding drums of the soundtrack that came with this vignette, and what have you got? Well, you've got the T-800 and you've got Disco Inferno. You put them together and you've got their love child, and it's this guy, Wardlow, because he looks like he could be quite an interesting little character. Obviously a top shagger by all accounts, but whether or not he's actually a robot, of course, well, that one remains to be seen. Wardlow is one of these wrestlers who has been fairly quiet on the independent US scene, but nothing really noteworthy there. But it does also sound good that they being AEW, of course, have brought him in to potentially push him as a new and emerging talent. Whether or not that's going to work, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Number 7, Kenny Omega, Sephiroth. Again. Now, it's fair to say this would not be the first time that Kenny Omega has styled himself on Final Fantasy VII's main antagonist, because it seems to be a guy he resonates with quite strongly. He's got the hair colour down to a T quite normally. He always likes a long black coat. It's all a bit leather. It's all a bit moody. It's all a bit Sephiroth. And All Out was no exception to this rule. Sephiroth, per the blurb of the game, was a soldier who was better than the best or better than the rest? No. Sephiroth, per the blurb of the game, was a soldier who was better than the rest, or maybe you could possibly say he was like a best bout machine, or the wrestling god, to quote Kenny Omega from the latest episode of Being the Elite. But one thing that happened with Sephiroth is that he eventually began to hate everything. So the question that was on our mind going into this pay-per-view was, perhaps, are we starting to see a bit of a heel turn, rather, for Kenny Omega? Now, AEW's character dynamics and arcs aren't exactly binary, and they're fairly fluid, as we've seen over the last few pay-per-views. Cody played both face and heel in a superb performance at Double or Nothing, and we also saw Matt Jackson, who typically is part of the face tag team, the Young Bucks, get up to his old rascal-like tactics as he tried to pull off, successfully pulled off the mask of Pentagon Zero to try and cause a little bit of trouble in their match at All Out. Now in Final Fantasy VII, Sephiroth was driven to hatred after he learned of all the sort of vile experiments that actually made him. The question here is it going to get to the point with Kenny Omega, especially hinted perhaps by the attire from All Out, that he's perhaps getting a bit sick of all the experiments that he's been put through by his company? I mean, let's look at this, for example. Pac was brought in as a replacement, a last-minute replacement, that is, for Jon Moxley. Could perhaps he be seeing this as an experiment, a failed one on his part? Another one that he's had to try and overcome, and another one that unfortunately he's failed at, because another little thread that goes through this is that Kenny Omega's beginning to get a bit of a reputation as a loser in AEW, particularly when it's these big match moments. Yes, he has a victory over Cena, but before that he lost to Chris Jericho, and now he's lost to Pac as well. In a company that has said they're going to put a lot of focus on how important wins and losses are, it seems to me that that's a dynamic that is quite important and quite significant. The commentary have already started to play up the fact that Omega's record isn't quite so stellar. So perhaps we could well see that lead into a little bit of a further story where he becomes fed up, he becomes full of hatred, and perhaps heads to a bit of a heel turn. Either that, or Kenny Omega just really likes video games and is a bit of a lover of Sephiroth. Who knows? Number 6, Brandy Rhodes, 7 of 9. A sartorial choice, sure to get the, how do we say this one in a PG fashion? Oh, it doesn't matter. It's not PG because it's not WWE. Sure to get the blood flowing of those rabid male fans at All Elite's All Out pay-per-view. She was cosplaying, she being Brandy Rhodes in this situation, the chief brand officer of AEW, cosplaying as 7 of 9 from Star Trek, the tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix 01, I am informed, or just 7 of 9 for short. Now, according to the internet, 7 of 9 is a character from Star Trek Voyager, a former Borg drone, and you'll have to excuse me if I've got that wrong because I don't know anything about Star Trek, sadly. That wasn't exactly my bag, but I do my research for you guys and gals at home. She is a crew member of the titular starship, and the character is said to be one who's slightly cold, slightly not quite as human as you want, but is capable of emulating human speech. That sounds just like another chief brand officer that I know from somewhere. Which one is it? Oh, that's right. It sounds a bit like Stephanie McMahon, that to me, doesn't it? So perhaps that could be another little dig. We've seen Cody do the throne smashing of the game. Could this perhaps be a little pointed jab from Brandy Rhodes towards Stephanie McMahon? Now, the character 7 of 9 was introduced as a surrogate for Spock from the original series, of course, and trying to re-emulate that sort of the weird odd couple chemistry that he had with Captain Kirk. Although the thing here is that eerily coincides with another replacement that we saw, because in 2002, Stephanie McMahon was hired in order to help try and replace and emulate Creative in 2002. Around about the same time when all of those promos suddenly became very scripted and uncannily human. What I'm trying to say to you here is that Brandy Rhodes not only dressed up as 7 of 9 for All Elite Wrestling's All Out, but she essentially dressed up as Steph of 9, and that is both terrifying and genius at the same time. Number 5, the Nightmare Family, Star Trek. Now, Brandy Rhodes wasn't the only one emulating someone or something from Star Trek on the night. As you will have seen, anybody who was watching will have seen the grand theme that went across the entire of the Nightmare Family, because someone had obviously very clearly, and that someone obviously being Cody, decided that Star Trek was going to be the theme of the night. Now, Cody wrestled a much more disciplined and safe match than most had expected for this pay-per-view, which was interesting, to be fair, because in all of the build-up, we were kind of being led to believe that this was going to be quite a vicious and quite an aggressive match. All of the stuff we saw on the road to All Out suggested this might have been a bit of a bloodbath, and because we all know how much Cody sort of loves those old Jim Crockett promotions, which were very familiar with said bloodbaths. But we should have known that that wasn't going to be the case from the off, because as he came out for his entrance, Cody's attire wasn't exactly something that set the tone for something that was going to be really intense and really brutal. Despite all the facts we knew about this match, being that Shawn Spears and Cody Rhodes were two sort of ex-best friends, now bitter enemies who were going to tear each other a new one, it was very odd then that Cody decided to come out, he and the rest of his Nightmare family pretty much, all dressed in Star Trek getup. It was obvious that he'd gone for this theme. We had Satan, obviously as we've mentioned, Brandy was already dressed as 7 of 9. Cody and the rest of the gang were covered in various, that was DDP, MJF and himself, were all covered, and not to forget Pharaoh, of course, who was slightly less uniformed up, shall we say. But they all had various iterations of the Star Trek uniform that we all have seen throughout the show. To be completely honest, it was quite jarring. It was almost borderline comical, truth be told. And I don't mean that in a nasty way, I just mean that in the sense that this was quite a serious match in the build, and now we're getting all of his posse walking towards the ring, dressed in their Star Trek getup. But I guess ultimately it didn't matter, because Cody, one of the most notable things for me on the night, is one of, if not the most over character and most over person in AEW. The fans were going mad for him, even more so than perhaps old fan favourite Kenny Omega, or maybe even the Young Bucks, because honestly, it was almost like he could do no wrong. But unfortunately, he didn't exactly use that, in my opinion, too much to help Shawn Spears in the way that I was hoping he might have done, because it was a big night for Shawn Spears too. But perhaps that sort of overness, that sort of commitment to it was slightly underutilised. So that didn't really do a whole ton to kind of present Shawn Spears as a real dangerous threat, because he was already dressing himself up in sort of pop culture attire for the sake of, I guess, well, to be honest, for a bit of self-indulgence, because Cody was, of course, the captain in this little entourage that he had, and perhaps that was another nod of his towards the fact that he is, of course, one of the executive vice presidents of the company. I don't want to say it was super sort of just self-indulgent too much, but let's be honest, he dressed as the captain, so it's kind of hard not to put them two together. Although the flip side of that coin is that we kind of know that Cody, by his own admission, is, well, what's the word? A gigantic nerd, to say the least. And he will dress up in pretty much anything to kind of get a chance to fulfill his dreams of the cosplaying from the likes of Star Wars to Star Trek, or even perhaps some video game stuff, because that leads us nicely to our next entry on this list. Number 4, Cody, Legend of Zelda. Professional wrestler, executive vice president, booker, son of Dusty Rhodes, and, of course, again, by his own self-profession, a gigantic nerd. Now this one does tie back to Cody's StarCast panel interview alongside Tony Schiavone, where he did talk about his love of the franchise The Legend of Zelda, more specifically his personal favourite, the Ocarina of Time. Now perhaps it was his experiences with that goddamn water temple that made him so equipped to deal with the despondent times that he had and faced at WWE, because God knows they were testing, and God knows so was that water temple. Perhaps he channeled that yes, god damn it, I did it, yes feeling of total accomplishment to help drive his journey in order to become one of the most popular babyfaces in modern American wrestling. Now WWE was its own series of grueling dungeons for Cody Rhodes. I mean, ridiculous gimmicks that he had to bear, some retcon tag teams that really should have gone a bit further, and that one dream match that he wanted with his brother had the heart completely ripped out of it. But eventually he would find the bombs, and he would manage to get away and get through the cracks in the door. Video game references, I've got them. Perhaps that's why he revealed a gold and red colour palette on his tights as a little homage to the SNES cover for A Link to the Past, of course, because he loves that game so much, so why not have it embroidered on his tights and on his attire? We've already seen he has a Triforce tattoo, so of course following that trend would make complete and utter sense. Or maybe it's just the nerd thing. Number 3, the Young Bucks, Mexican Day of the Dead. Ironically, it's Cody who's done the most effective job to build a lot of his major matches before AEW pay-per-views, and he's done it through those intense sit-down interviews that have ranged from epic to emotional to downright sinister. And yet, at All Out, the Young Bucks, who have normally traded in a lot of different jokes and catchphrases on being the elite, decided to bring a little bit of a thematic element to their ring attire for the All Out pay-per-view. Now normally we'd see the 80s style tassels on the Young Bucks boots, but in this instance they were wearing piñata strings in their places and Mexican Day of the Dead masks adorned on their heads, and this sort of whole cultural appropriation set the scene perfectly for their, quite frankly, batch insane match and hysterically violent match against the Lucha Brothers, which, as I am reliably informed by my notes, was the Escalera de la Muerta ladder match. I will try and record that better, but it's really early in the morning now. I'm very tired. Now, the disrespect that was shown to Mexican heritage here by the Young Bucks was one that genuinely got a holy shit moment out of the crowd. One that generated huge jeers from the AEW fan base towards the Bucks. And the majority of these fans, who you've got to remember, are sat there wearing Young Bucks and or Bullet Club t-shirts. I mean, this is a pretty powerful moment. Now the match itself was, of course, a stunning, jaw-dropping professional wrestling match. One that we just had to watch. You couldn't take your eyes off it as everyone was hitting spot after spot after spot. And the Young Bucks looked like they were doing the one thing that brought them this far in the dance. And I have to say, if you're thinking along those lines, they went back to those sort of heel tendencies that they had for their characters. These obnoxious guys who didn't care about anybody. And quite frankly, as characters, that is where they excel. So using the little themes from Mexican heritage here to really kind of hammer that home and how much they were trying to antagonize their opponents for the night, the Lucha Bros, was absolutely perfect. And speaking of those Lucha Brothers, they weren't exactly shy in the attire department themselves. Number 2, the Lucha Brothers, Samurai. Now, I realise that Samurai might seem like a bit of a basic way of talking about this, but what I've got to say about the attires is certainly not basic. This is what the theatre of cosplaying should achieve when you bring it into the realm of professional wrestling. Now, on the surface of it, this might have just looked like a modern pro wrestling trope. Pentagon and Phoenix were dressed as essentially as samurais, and it looked like they were just coming to the ring, perhaps, you could argue, to just look a bit badass, or to maybe give off a bit of a gladiator aura, one might think. But there's a little bit more to it than that. Samurais were warriors of pre-modern Japan and were known and famous for their extensive use of weapons. Now, the Lucha Brothers themselves used an extensive amount of weapons in their grueling all-out match against the Young Bucks. Now, they may not have been using your typical bows and arrows and your spears and your guns that you might associate with sort of that old pre-modern stuff, but what we were using was ladders, tables, and anything you could get your hands on, and they did almost kill Matt Jackson with a Canadian destroyer through a table from off the top of a ladder. That seems like a pretty good weapon to me. Now, it's fair to say their attire foreshadowed the end result of the match. They managed to successfully defend their AAA World Tag Team Championships, and they climbed the top of the ladder in the match to do so, while also climbing atop of the ladder of AEW's Tag Team rankings, maybe even of the World Tag Team rankings, because these two are now the ruling military guard of the global tag team wrestling scene, and I don't think that could be actually even argued remotely in terms of Pentagon and Rey Fenix. Or maybe, just maybe, given Pentagon's awesome look or Rey Fenix's extremely cool moves, they just thought as a whole collective that it just looked pretty damn great. I mean, let's face it, it really did, didn't it? And number 1, LAX Point Break. The debuting Ortiz and Santana managed to disrupt the post-match celebrations of the Lucha Brothers after turning up at AEW, much to a huge reaction and a massive round of applause after they revealed their took off their masks to reveal their faces to the world of All Elite Wrestling. And my oh my, did that go down well, because this tag team are fantastic, and that means it's even more exciting the fact that they are straight in there after the Lucha Bros defended their titles in order to put themselves right in there as the next challengers. Now, the disguises here serve with a bit of a dual purpose, to be honest, because obviously, like any good person who writes wrestling knows, if you get two guys who are interfering or turning up or disrupting for a beatdown, one pop comes for the actual attack itself, where they beat down the Young Bucks and the Lucha Bros, and you get your second pop from the big reveal to show who is behind the mask that they were adorning. And it's fair to say the disguises were picked with AEW's millennial audience in mind. Now, the masks that they wore, former United States Presidents Bill Clinton and John F. Kennedy, were obviously a very big nod to the film Point Break, in which, if you haven't watched that already, what are you doing with your day? Stop what you're doing, go and watch Point Break. It's cheesy brilliance. It's got Keanu Reeves, it's got Patrick Swayze, it's got everything you'd possibly want from a bunch of ridiculous guys on surfboards who do bank robberies. I don't know why I'm explaining it to you, just go and watch it. But when you do, you will learn that the bank robbers that they are in that film go by the name the ex-presidents. Now, if you're going to make a debut for yourself, what better way to do it than this? And if their mission statement, which you have to presume it is to steal the spotlight and probably the AAA World Tag Team Championships from the Lucha Bros, then what better way to tie it all together than with the ex-presidents of Point Break. And let's not forget, again, if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. But for those who have, you'll know that the action is pulsating, it's fantastic, it's high speed, it's top class, and that's everything that LAX are and everything that they're bringing to AEW's tag team division. And much like our Surfer boys in Point Break, again, go and watch it. Why are you still here? Just go and watch it. Much like our Surfer boys from the film, though, Ortiz and Santana have arrived in AEW on a wave, of momentum. So there you have it, that is it. This one feels like an especially tired version of Hidden Meanings for All Elite Wrestling's All Out. My apologies if the coherence of it has been a bit rubbish. I'm sure I blacked out at least 3 times in the middle of that filming. Ben Roy Turner has undoubtedly made me look moderately okay. Who knows? We'll find out. But I'm sure you have tons more things that you found hidden meanings and lovely little intricacies from people's attires from All Elite, All Out pay-per-view. So let us know your thoughts on those and ours and yours that you found in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and share. The original article for this will be on whatculture.com. That is by Michael Sidgwick. Go and find that. I'm sure it'll be a delightful read because my version of it has just come out of the mouth of a half-dead human being. You can follow What Culture at WhatCultureWWE on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter, although that might not be the greatest advertisement after this video, at It's Adam Nicholas. Or if you just want some more videos, there should be one about here and maybe one about there. Who knows? I'm pointing at thin air. My name is Adam Nicholas, and I will see you next time.